All right, here we are again, another aviation and whatever else comes out of it show with Paul Brennan in Wellington and Martin Noakes. Where are you?
I'm still in Toorak.
Toorak, South Melbourne.
Yeah.
Yes, I spent a day or so in Melbourne about a week or so ago. Always good to get a look at the aircraft at Melbourne Airport, and likewise Sydney. I went through there. Plenty of A380s about, I got to say.
There are, aren't there?
For an aircraft that's not selling too well, I'm seeing a lot of them.
Well, yes, more about that later, actually.
It was interesting to see within the last week or so the Royal New Zealand Air Force showing off their new Texan II. Wow.
Yeah, fighter planes, almost.
You could almost strap weapons onto them.
Yes, in fact, some of them do have hard points. I'm not sure whether the Royal New Zealand Air Force ones do, but there are PC-7s out there with hard points under the wings.
Now let's just go back into a bit of history here. This is a Pilatus design, isn't it, ultimately?
Yes, it's the PC-7 that the Americans took and, as they do, completely re-engineered to make the Beechcraft Texan II. It's heavier, it's a bit slower, but I think it's a lot cheaper.
Well, it's certainly a bit closer to, the real thing than those CT4 air trainers, one would think.
Indeed, it'll be a quantum leap for those guys.
So they're fast, aren't they? They're, 300-400 knot machines. They're just below really being a jet. Like you say, there are hard points on them, because you wonder if they're going to be training on these things, what are they going to be flying? Because the natural follow-on from that is to some sort of jet fighter or some sort of aircraft like that, and they don't have those types in our Air Force.
No. The Beechcraft's not that fast, actually. It's the PC-21's the real fast one. The Texan II gets along at sort of Second World War fighter speed, 320, 350 miles an hour.
Yeah, it's still not bad. Not bad.
That's pretty fast, yeah. They have 270 knots. That's pretty quick. They do another one, the PC-21, which is very high-tech, and that is actually a substitute for a jet trainer. They reckon you don't need to fly a jet if you train in one of those.
Wow. Yeah, I know the Aussies have had something close to this for quite some years now.
Yes, I think they've got the PC-9 version, but very similar. But yeah, they're a great plane. I wonder if that's all part of the alliance that the Americans, maybe that's why New Zealand went and bought from America as opposed to buying direct from Pilatus.
Right, yeah. I mean, you still wonder what is the ultimate sort of goal of the training, because, as I say, once you've come off that and done your training, there's really nowhere else to go. You're back on to the slow, heavy stuff, aren't you?
It's nice to be an Air Force pilot if you get to fly one of those around every now and again.
Well, they're certainly smart looking, and they're an improvement on what we had, and I guess it helps recruitment. If you're showing off good hardware and not old broken down stuff, it makes people more keen to join the Air Force. And
so it's quite a capable plane, so it can go high, it can go relatively fast, and they can have a lot of fun in it, I reckon.
Can they be refueled? Will they be able to engage in any of that with the Aussies or anything? I wonder.
No, they don't have refueling capability, no.
I think we've got the first one or two here in the country now. How are they getting here? Do we know? Are they flying them over or are they being shipped?
The one that they saw in the UK had just come in from Keflavik in Iceland.
So they're flying them, yeah.
Flew it over, yeah.
It's quite a long flight for a small aircraft.
Yes, it is. Yeah, you hope you're ready for it because...
you take your life jacket with you.
They don't have great range either. 1,500, 2,000 kilometres, so it'll be a lot of stops.
And did I see that they were a blue colour or a different colour anyway from what we're used to in the past? I think earlier trainers have been, bright yellow colours and even before that sort of camouflage. It appeared to be sort of navy blue, the one I saw. I may have been seeing things, but keep a lookout for images and footage of those machines as they come on strength. The big story, and I noticed they were talking about it when I was in Melbourne, it's all over the place, and that is Qantas's loss in the billions. But there seems to be they're talking up the silver lining, that this is as bad as it gets. We've come through the hard stuff, and Alan Joyce is already talking about profit ahead, or at least in surplus, the next financial year. So,
well, yeah, it's quite interesting. So the big hit, of course, was the fact that they wrote down the value of their existing fleet. So they've been artificially supporting the value of their existing fleet. It's quite old and a bit decrepit, especially the 767s and the 74s. They now reflect the true resale value of what they're actually worth. But of course that meant that Qantas took a massive hit on its assets. So instead of having planes worth hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions, they've got planes worth about $2.50. Which
yes.
It's honest, but it's an accounting trick, really. It's an accounting trick.
So what, are they trying to pin that as the problem area, loss of value, rather than just not doing business as well as they used to?
No, it's a combination. They've been taken to the cleaners by all the Asian airlines, or they say they've been taken to the cleaners by all the Asian airlines that are now operating into their market. And that does seem to be true when you speak to people, and people are flying off to Thailand, this, that, and the other. Very few of them are flying Qantas, and Air Asia's doing quite well. Thai's making some very good offers. Singapore Airlines, so they're trying to take as many Australians out as possible, and they seem to be doing quite successfully.
So it's all about price, bums on seat price, and Qantas, they're never going to win that battle, are they? Their cost structure will always be higher operating out of a country like Australia compared to those competitors.
Yes, I guess that's it. And if you're flying economy, and it's a 6-7 hour flight, as most flights to Asia from here in Australia are, how uncomfortable can you get in 6 hours, or how comfortable could economy ever make you?
Yes.
Not very.
Well, the brand loyalty, we've talked about this quite a few times, and I noticed that is now being talked about in the media. How strong is the brand loyalty? And some people are saying that really it only extends now to the old routes, the real solid ones, the kangaroo route through to London, a few other routes, and then that's about it. And they're talking about Jetstar doing everything else possibly. Yeah,
the brand loyalty suffered because so many people were forced onto Jetstar flights, and Jetstar, even the Australians think it's rubbish. They do. I mean, they're quite harsh about Jetstar. Obviously, because I fly in the Air New Zealand world, when I do have to take a flight in Australia, I take Virgin. Man, they're packed.
Yeah.
And busy. And I think Virgin's taken a lot away from them. A lot.
I did the classic Sydney-Melbourne, Melbourne-Sydney, that well-worn, I think it's the fourth busiest air route in the world or something, on Qantas 737-800, and it was packed both ways. Absolutely chocker to the gills.
Oh, yeah?
So, making money some way.
Yeah, they must be doing something, and notice that on my Air New Zealand flights as well. I've been coming over most weeks now. I'm surprised how full they are. I'd say there's 10 seats free in the plane, max, if that.
Yeah.
You just think, why aren't they running bigger planes?
This phenomenon, though, of not checking in your baggage and taking it carry-on is causing huge problems with people getting their contents in the overhead lockers and there being enough room. I mean, yes. On both flights, I noticed that they were delayed a good 5 or 7 or so minutes just because of that. I guess people are trying to avoid paying that little bit extra, and that's what you get.
Yeah, the length people go to, though, is amazing. I mean, some of the carry-on baggage people bring on, you just think, geez, is it worth it for $20?
I saw a couple of the Jetstar 787s on the ground in both cities, actually. And yes, you're right, they are quite big. When you get a person next to them, they are deceptively large aircraft.
They're nice looking, aren't they, in the Jetstar colours?
They're saying also that as those 787s come on, the A330s come out of the Jetstar fleet and they go to Qantas, and then they're retiring 767s as that happens.
Yeah. Some of the other comments being made here is Qantas has been flying older planes around, and why didn't they buy the 777 when they had the chance? And there's some interesting comments out of that. So the current CEO, Joyce, he's actually been at Qantas for 11 years, so if he really believed that, he could have probably turned it around or tried to purchase them. But it turns out that the real block to Qantas getting 777s way back in the day was Borghetti, who's now the head of Virgin. When the idea was put forward to them to buy 777s because they're so efficient in that, they said, no, our 747s are nearly paid for. It's better to keep these planes running for longer. There's no need to make the big investment. She'll be all right, mate. And, it didn't work out.
Well, okay, so they chose the easy road and got burned.
Yes, exactly. And of course, the road is complicated here more because it's not just a question of buying new planes. It's a question of having a huge fight with the union to support your current fleet. It always seems to be a real problem to get people to retrain. Either the company doesn't want to pay for the retrain or something, but it's always an issue here. You can't do that because of this. What will happen to these people?
Right.
Well, surely you'd retrain them, but obviously they don't think that'll happen.
Well, I guess, they've been 747 since, I think, 1972, so that goes back a long way. And you can see that culture has been there for decades, so not surprising, really.
It's interesting when even like sort of Japanese airlines, which are generally even more tradition-bound, they just got rid of them.
Yes, you see those Qantas 74s, especially at Sydney, around their maintenance base there, and you know that probably most of them don't have any future at all. They say no. The Coke can sitting there just waiting.
Just waiting to go, waiting to be cut up eventually. Qantas and British Airways are interesting. They still fly a lot of 74s.
If Alan Joyce can pull that off in a year, then he'll go from zero to hero, won't he?
Yes, actually will. I mean, by taking this big write-down, they probably have set themselves up for some good news soonish, as long as they can cut down their loss-making international routes and get their domestic business back up.
I noticed that every Qantas flight has an Emirates tag as well. Even
Yes.
Wellington through to Sydney had that.
Yes.
So they're in there everywhere. Speaking of 777s, MH370, more has come to light on that. This is interesting.
Well, and more guessing.
Well, they've had a long time to mull this one over, haven't they? And that is, they've interpreted satellite phone data again and found that there is a different sort of point that the aircraft changed course.
Yeah, they reckon it might have turned south earlier.
And does that say anything? Is any expert saying, well, that means this or that means that?
No, not yet. They're just going to redefine the search area to go more south and possibly further.
Right. So I take it an earlier turn means that it had more range going in the southerly direction, therefore could have gone further, deeper into the Southern Ocean.
That's what they're suspecting at this point, yeah.
Oh, well, I guess, it's out there, it just doesn't disappear. One day, someone will drag something up or a bit will be found. Of course, we know the real story about that, thanks to those authors,
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah, I hope we find out soon. It'll be very interesting.
We talked about the C-Series having problems 3 or 4 shows ago, and no one quite knew why. I think it was something to do with the gear turbofan engine, and there have been sort of comments along the way from people saying, oh, this could mean real trouble, whatever. Am I right that the C-Series hasn't resumed testing in all that time? Is that correct?
2 things. Yes, it hasn't resumed testing due to that engine failure, but apparently the engine failure was not out of the ordinary and obviously not expected. They understood the cause and had the redesign underway pretty quickly, and the engine's actually been ready for flight apparently for some months. But interesting that prior to that as well, the plane just wasn't being tested as much as everyone was expecting, and they think there might have been something that came out of the early test data, which has given them reason to slow the whole thing down.
Oh.
And they think Bombardier's communicated it really, really badly as well. And now over the last 3 or 4 weeks, they've basically just got rid of all their upper management.
Oh, really? Gosh, that is serious.
Yeah, a lot of their, especially on the marketing and public relations side, they've got rid of them. And for like the past, I'd say, 8-10 weeks, they've been saying testing will resume within weeks, and nothing seems to be happening. Although they have come out again and said it will resume within weeks, and for some reason they think it should start again in the next 2 weeks. Unfortunately, the biggest customer has said they want to delay their deliveries until someone else has flown it.
Oh dear, you don't like it when people start talking like that. So what do we read into that? There's some sort of showstopper problem that no one's actually talking about that's come out and become obvious in the early test flying, and what, the PR guys have done a bad job keeping the customers happy through this period?
Yeah, and keeping their suppliers happy and apparently all sorts going on in the background. Although they do say there appears to be an issue with the plane, and Bombardier has been pretty good in as much as they haven't tried to throw their suppliers under the bus in terms of pointing fingers and whose fault it is. But the interesting thing was, right at the beginning, it took a few flights and then was parked up for like 3 months, and some people thought they were doing some quite major things to the wing, like, adjusting the incidence or trying to change the wing twist or something.
Oh dear.
So maybe it's just not on the numbers.
Okay, so they're sort of having to go back to, well, maybe not the drawing board, but effect, or try out a whole lot of things before you really try and have to go back to the drawing board.
Yeah, which is unfortunate because they had sort of, first mover lead on that plane. And I must admit, when you see it standing on a tarmac, it's a great looking little plane, isn't it?
Yes, and of course, no one gets paid until the first one is delivered. So any delay is a cash hemorrhage situation potentially for Bombardier, you'd think, though they've got deep pockets, I'm sure.
Well, not that deep, and apparently they're hurting. So.
All right.
Yeah.
So from the C-Series to, well, an aircraft that is in service, but everyone's seen those photos, Martin, of those early 787s lined up on the taxiways of Payne Field at Everett near Seattle, wondering if they're ever going to shift or if Boeing's ever going to sell those early aircraft. Looks like they're going to stay there pretty well, are they?
Yeah, they're calling them the terrible teens, and it's numbers, I think, 10, 11 through to 19, and then airframe 21 haven't been sold, and nobody wants them. It seems they can't even give them away. They're early models, so they're heavy, they've been taken apart so often and reassembled so often as they try to get the manufacturing issues under control that they are apparently quite ropey. They're basically stuck. Now, I think of the first 10, 6 have essentially been written off. They haven't broken them up. But Boeing took a $2.7 billion write-down development costs and is apparently not even trying to sell them. There was some talk that they could have gone out as corporate jets. I think 1 or 2 of the 10 are still destined for that. But 6 of them aren't going anywhere, and then there's about another 9 or 10 sticking around that nobody wants. Every now and again, an airline announces that they're taking them, and then 3 or 4 months later, they cancel. The latest is Transaero, that Russian-Israeli airline.
Yeah.
They were down for 4. They cancelled, and the latest rumor is, though not confirmed, that they're going to actually take 4 747-8Is instead.
So those early aircraft, the ones that you're talking about being assembled, disassembled, and being heavy, I mean, this is not normal, because even if you go back to the early Boeing types, virtually every airframe, including usually the prototype, was sold.
Yes, it looks like Boeing are going to have quite a few more than a dozen that ain't going to go nowhere.
You send them to museums.
Well, yeah. Now, the problem that Boeing also have is that their initial plans were to be able to assemble these planes. Well, I think, what was the initial? Initially, they were saying they could assemble them in 3 days or
something like that. Something ridiculous, yeah.
It was just crazy. So these fully stuffed and functional airframe segments are going to arrive in Washington simply to be bolted together, software installed, flown out of there. Of course, that's not happening, but their whole business model was based upon this incredibly quick production time, which they're nowhere near to achieving, and now they're saying, or some are saying, they never will achieve it. And what's happened is once the initial euphoria has worn off, so that huge bubble of orders that took them to nearly 1,000 aircraft in a very short period of time, the 787-800 and the 787-10 actually aren't selling that well. In fact, they're not selling very well at all.
Oh, dear.
And somebody posted some statistics or some data that they found that said over the last 2 years, the A380s actually outsold the 787s.
The Boeing fanboys will have a bit of a problem getting their head around that.
No, they won't like that at all. No, it seems that the sweet spot is the 900, which Air New Zealand has bought. Now, by all accounts, that'll be a very, very good aircraft.
Yeah.
But the 800, it's probably already had its day. And interestingly enough, despite the fact that the whole marketing plan behind the Boeing marketing campaign was to promote these long, thin, point-to-point routes, most people are simply using them as 767 replacements on their hub-and-spoke networks, and the only reason they bought them is because they were dirt cheap. They sold some of them for $115 million. The list price is over $200 now. When they go back to these customers and say, would you like to buy some more? They say, sure, for $115 million, we'll take a couple. And Boeing's like, yeah, well, not so much. We're going to have to charge you sort of $150, $180 after discount. And people are saying, nah, cheers.
Yeah, I think when people go back and look at this, with a few years between that time and what has been happening, I think in terms of the program, what the historians will identify is the level of hype that was put in at an early stage that really could never be met, and it became a rod for their own back. There must be some sort of corporate lesson in that.
Well, you'd think so. It's not the first time it's happened, and it's assuredly not the last time.
Well, what do they call that? Irrational exuberance.
Irrational exuberance, yeah.
Back home, while you've been in Australia, you've probably been following it though, there's been a lot of talk about Air New Zealand's profit, up 45% to $262 million. We've made many comments on this aviation podcast about how you could argue that Air New Zealand's success is underpinned by that non-competitive, especially regional domestic market that it occupies and controls. They're pulling out all the stops to tell people in the regions that they're not being excessively charged, though if you go and look at a return flight from, say, Gisborne down to Timaru and back, it's about $1,600, which is about what you'll pay to go to Los Angeles and back on a good day. I think it's pretty obvious, isn't it? Wouldn't we agree that they are doing quite well out of the regions and there is scope for them to give the regions a better deal? And really, they should just admit that this is how airlines in their position operate. There are plenty of examples around the world of carriers that have monopoly positions in domestic markets that are successful because they can rely on that full retail business.
And it seems that the Prime Minister even got involved because it said that he's had a word with Air New Zealand about their very, very high regional costs What's also interesting as well, at the same time that Air New Zealand were posting a 45% profit, Auckland Airport profit also up by 21%, and that's also another monopoly position because you ain't going to land nowhere else in Auckland.
Am I missing something? Haven't we been through a global economic meltdown? And hasn't it been some of the toughest business conditions since the Great Depression? And here we have some companies making huge profits with this backdrop.
If you're in a rockstar economy, which apparently New Zealand's got.
Right, well, I missed that one.
My point is, if you want to be a member of the rockstar economy, you've got to be in a monopoly position, owning an airport, running an airline, or in a supermarket duopoly.
I think we have all of those.
Yeah.
All right, let's get on to our aircraft of the day, and I've been looking forward to talking about this one for a while because it's one of the aircraft that I remember as a kid being really impressed with seeing a picture of, just because I think of the layout. We're going back to 1962, and of course the British leading again. This could have been an aircraft that was very successful for them in sales terms around the world. Unfortunately, the arch rival across the Atlantic capitalised on the success of this configuration, but we're talking about the Hawker Siddeley Trident, the DH-121, first flew in 1962, Martin.
Yes, 1962. The first ever completely blind landing in 1965.
That's right, that was part of the sales effort for the aircraft, that within a few years of it entering into service, that it would be able to fly auto land approaches with the 3 separate autopilots, I believe. The 2-on-1 system, I think they called it, where 2 had to agree if 1 didn't. It had the moving map. In fact, of course, people will remember that the undercarriage location, the nose wheel location, is in a rather different place than the conventional, and I think that was to accommodate the avionics. There were more avionics in this aircraft than anywhere else, and they had to put it down in that area, and that meant they had to move the nose wheel.
I thought that nose wheel was very cool. Offset to the left and swinging down from the side, not going fore and aft.
Yeah.
I thought that was always very distinctive. I also liked the fact that the middle engine intake was a Trident. Aha.
I think BEA at the time had a rule that never 2 engines, hence the trijet. That was a real departure, wasn't it, from conventional thinking, right out of the box?
It was right out of the box, and quite underpowered by all accounts. It's been said about many aircraft, but when I was a kid, that was the first time I'd heard the saying that only climbed due to the curvature of the Earth.
Yeah.
That's how slow it was off the ground. But, it had spays, 11,000 pound thrust each. It still got along at well over 550 miles an hour. A very capable aircraft for the day, considering the power it had. And the last model, I think they only made a couple of them, carried 180 people, nearly 5,000 kilometers at 580 miles an hour or something. Very popular aircraft in China. There used to be one parked around the back at Heathrow. When I was living in that part of the world, I used to see it quite a lot. And that one still had the little turbojet. Yeah, it had a little booster under the just above the middle engine built into the tail. That's how underpowered it was.
Primary users, British European Airways, BA, and later, of course, British Airways as a result of that. The CAAC, China Airlines, I think.
Chinese loved it, yeah.
Yeah, they had quite a few. Cyprus Airways had a few. Number build 117. The first version was designed to seat 70, but as you say, it went on the ultimate version about the capacity of the 727-200. That was the thing, though. It was the British, again, came up with the idea, made it work, but it was the Americans who made the commercial success from that.
So that would have been due to political infighting and bad management, really, wouldn't it? Because the plane was perfectly sound. You and Flight Simulator, I used to love those aircraft by that guy called David Maltby, because he seemed to specialize in
the English ones, yeah.
Yeah, and my 2 favorite David Maltby models were the VC-10 and the Trident, and it had the sort of semi-realistic cockpit, and it had that moving map thing, which is basically just a piece of paper that moved around on the glass.
But it worked. Yeah, it actually worked. And when you combine that with the auto-land system, people were arriving at Heathrow in pea soup when everybody else was still up there circling around waiting for the weather to clear.
Yes, a technological tour de force, probably.
They went on to fly right into the 90s. I think it was the Chinese that were the last to fly them. And, of course, they had the droop flaps, the early leading-edge slats. And that, I think, was behind one of the crashes at Staines after they'd taken off from Heathrow in the early 70s. Someone had retracted in the droops too early and the thing stalled and fell into a field. I think that was when deep stall became understood. The horizontal stabiliser gets into the disturbed airflow off the top of the main wings, and very hard to recover from that, apparently.
120 odd people went down on that, didn't they?
There was, I think, a mid-air collision between a DC-9 and a Trident over, was it Yugoslavia back in the either late 70s or early 80s? I remember that. Quite a few models of the Trident, Martin. There was the 1C, which I think was the one that went into service. There was the 2E. There was the 3B. And then there was the Super 3B. I think that might be the one that you were talking about with the booster engine in the tail. Its range was extended, and only 2 built of the Super 3B, 26 built of the 3B, 50 of the 2E, 15 of the 1E, and 24 of the 1C. So there you go.
Yeah, I think the reason the Super 3B wasn't built is because the 727 was already cleaning up by then.
You never made any of them any money. That's the main thing.
No.
I remember seeing a program fronted by that guy Dickinson, who I think is the lead singer of Iron Maiden and a pilot himself.
Yeah.
And he did a documentary series on what he called the heavy metal, and one of the episodes had the Trident in it, and he was in the cockpit of, I think, the Trident at Duxford at the museum there, talking to one of the early pilots. And everything was that it was a great aircraft to fly. It was really responsive. Once it was up to speed, it was very crisp handler, but the comment all along was underpowered, and underpowered.
I mean, of course, they could have stuck Pratt & Whitney's on the back. That would have probably solved a few problems.
I read somewhere that the reason it was underpowered is because BEA only operated in the European sort of area, and most of the runways it operated from were major airports that were in excess of 10,000 feet long. Unlike the American situation where the 7.2 was designed to fly into airports like LaGuardia, I think 5,500 foot runway, and other provincial airports around the States that had shorter runways, and therefore the need for real high lift wing and very powerful engines. That BA didn't have those requirements, so therefore it was too tailor-made to one airline's operational requirements.
Yeah, it was exactly the same situation with the VC-10, wasn't it? It was made for a few hot and high airports in Africa and Asia, so that BOAC could do those funny routes where they go sort of London, Athens, Alexandria, Addis Ababa, and then they end up in Salisbury and then go back by Madagascar for some reason.
It's our aircraft of the day, the DH-121. And that's about all we've got time for again, Martin. Paul Brennan here in Wellington. Have a good 2 weeks. We'll see you again in 2 weeks, and
Noakes and Turak.
Talk to you again soon. See you later.